To soccer now, where some fans say they're boycotting the upcoming World Cup games in the U.S. The local World Cup committee has been expecting hundreds of thousands of visitors to travel to the Metro when the matches kick off in 5 months.
We're of course looking ahead to the World Cup this summer. The biggest World Cup ever staged. 48 teams. 3 host countries. 104 matches. Billions in revenue. Millions of fans expected to move across North America. And then Germany did something FIFA did not want to hear. Not by withdrawing. Not by protesting outside a stadium. Not by calling an emergency press conference. But by allowing one dangerous word to enter the conversation. Boycott. The warning did not come from a random commentator. It did not come from a fan group trying to trend online. It came from inside German football, from OK Gottlich, a DFB vice president and president of St. Pauli, who said the time had come to seriously discuss whether Germany should consider boycotting the 2026 World Cup. And the power of that statement was not that Germany had already walked away. The power was that Germany made walking away thinkable. That is where FIFA's problem begins. Because this tournament was never designed to handle doubt. It was designed to be automatic. Automatic participation. Automatic ticket demand. Automatic broadcast value. Automatic sponsor confidence. Automatic global excitement. But Germany's statement disrupted the one assumption FIFA needed most, that the biggest football nations would show up no matter what. The DFB has since said a boycott is not currently under consideration, and that Germany is preparing for the tournament. But the damage was not in the final decision. The damage was in the discussion itself. Because once a federation like Germany has to publicly explain why it is still going, the World Cup has already changed. This was supposed to be FIFA's master plan. The 2026 World Cup was meant to be the largest commercial football spectacle ever built. Expanded from 32 teams to 48. Expanded from 64 matches to 104. Spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Packaged as a festival of global unity and sold as a historic moment for football's future. But beneath that vision was a fragile political truth. The United States was not just one host among 3. It was the centerpiece. The commercial engine. The biggest market. The symbolic stage. The country FIFA expected to transform football into a bigger business machine than ever before. And now, that centerpiece has become the risk. Because the same United States that wants to host the world is also creating anxiety about who will be allowed to enter, who will be questioned, who will be detained, who will be denied, and who will feel welcome when they arrive. That is not a small problem. That is a legitimacy problem. For FIFA, this is uncomfortable because the organization has spent decades repeating one sentence whenever politics becomes inconvenient. Sport and politics should remain separate. But that sentence collapses the moment immigration policy decides which fans can travel. It collapses when national teams qualify but their supporters face travel bans. It collapses when human rights groups issue warnings that fans, journalists, workers, and visitors could face arbitrary entry denial, detention, racial profiling, invasive searches, or immigration enforcement. It collapses when Human Rights Watch calls on FIFA to demand an ice truce around World Cup venues so that fans and workers are not treated as targets during the tournament. And it collapses when FIFA itself is accused of becoming politically entangled after awarding a peace prize to Donald Trump during the World Cup cycle. So when Germany raises the question of a boycott, it is not just reacting to one policy. It is reacting to a pattern. A tournament that was sold as global unity is now being pulled into border politics, immigration fear, diplomatic pressure, and questions about whether football can still pretend to float above the world that surrounds it. Germany understands the weight of this better than most countries. Germany is not just another participant. It is one of the pillars of the World Cup economy. German matches bring viewers. German brands bring money. German participation brings legitimacy. German history gives the tournament weight. Sponsors do not invest in a World Cup as an abstract moral celebration. They invest in predictable attention. They invest in Germany versus a rival. They invest in England in prime time. They invest in France, Spain, Italy, Brazil, Argentina, and the teams that make casual viewers care. So when Germany says participation can be discussed, it does not simply create a political debate. It creates a financial risk. Broadcasters start thinking about ratings. Sponsors start thinking about exposure. Advertisers start thinking about value. Legal teams start thinking about clauses. Federations start thinking about public pressure. And FIFA starts realizing that the product it promised to sell may no longer be completely under its control. That is the real bombshell. Germany did not cancel the World Cup. Germany exposed the hidden weakness beneath FIFA's plan. Because FIFA's business model depends on the belief that national federations will accept the host environment after the hosting rights have been awarded. The stadiums can be ready. The tickets can be sold. The hotels can be booked. The security plans can be written. But if powerful federations begin asking whether participation itself carries political meaning, then the entire system becomes unstable. The 1980 Olympic boycott is the historical shadow hanging over this debate. That boycott did not stop the Olympics from happening. The medals were awarded. The ceremonies continued. The athletes who attended competed. But the event was permanently marked by absence. The question was no longer only who won. The question became who refused to appear. That is why Germany's reference to boycott history matters. Sporting boycotts do not need to destroy an event physically. They can damage the moral authority of the event. They can turn celebration into controversy. They can make every match feel like it is being played inside a political argument. And that is exactly what FIFA wanted to avoid. FIFA survived Qatar 2022 because criticism was loud, but participation remained universal. Teams complained. Media debated. Human rights groups warned. But in the end, the football world showed up. The 2026 problem is different. The criticism is not only about the host's past. It is about the host's present behavior during the tournament cycle. It is about travel bans. It is about immigration enforcement. It is about diplomatic threats toward allies. It is about fans from qualified countries wondering whether they can even enter the host nation. It is about a tournament that depends on global movement being staged inside a political environment that makes movement conditional. That contradiction cannot be solved with a slogan. You cannot invite the world with one hand and filter the world with the other. You cannot sell unity while people worry about being detained at the airport. You cannot ask fans to spend thousands of dollars on tickets, flights, hotels, and visas if the political environment tells them they may not be welcome. And you cannot tell federations that football is apolitical while the conditions of entry are being shaped by politics. This is why Germany's position matters even though the DFB has officially ruled out a boycott for now. Because official participation does not erase institutional doubt. It only postpones the question. The German Federation has said it believes in the unifying power of football. It has said it wants to strengthen the positive force of the World Cup, not prevent it. But that carefully worded statement also confirms something FIFA would rather ignore: the issue had reached the level of serious institutional discussion. And once that happens, the silence is broken. Other federations hear it. Sponsors hear it. Fans hear it. Governments hear it. And suddenly, the tournament is not just a fixture list. It is a pressure point. This is where the wider European mood becomes important. Denmark has had to navigate the Greenland question, where American rhetoric turned territorial sovereignty into a diplomatic issue. The Netherlands has faced petition pressure from fans. British voices have discussed whether England and Scotland should consider withdrawal. French officials have tried to hold the line that sport should remain separate from politics while avoiding language that closes every door. None of this means Europe is about to walk away as one bloc. But that is not the point. The point is that Europe is no longer treating participation as emotionally simple. And FIFA knows what that means. A World Cup can survive criticism. It can survive protest. It can survive angry headlines. What it struggles to survive is uncertainty among the very countries that make the tournament commercially irresistible. Because uncertainty does not need to shout. It works quietly. It moves through boardrooms, not streets. It appears in sponsorship meetings, broadcast projections, insurance calculations, security briefings, visa discussions, federation statements, and government consultations. It turns a celebration into a risk assessment. That is why Canada and Mexico suddenly look different in this story. They have not needed to attack the United States. They have not needed to embarrass FIFA. They have not needed to present themselves as replacements. They simply appear more stable by comparison. Canada can present rule of law, predictability, and diplomatic restraint as strengths. Mexico can point to its World Cup history, its football culture, and its experience hosting major matches. In a normal tournament, those qualities would be background details. In this tournament, they become political capital. Because when the American portion of the World Cup becomes associated with immigration fear, ICE anxiety, visa uncertainty, protest suppression, and diplomatic instability, the Canadian and Mexican portions begin to look like safer stages inside the same tournament. That does not mean FIFA can easily move matches. The contracts are complex. The stadium allocations are fixed. The logistics are enormous. The sponsors are locked in. The host cities have planned for years. But perception matters. And right now, perception is shifting. The United States was supposed to be the center of gravity. Instead, it risks becoming the center of controversy. The irony is sharp. America wanted the prestige of hosting the world. But hosting the world requires more than stadiums. It requires trust. It requires allies who feel respected. It requires fans who feel welcome. It requires qualified nations that believe their supporters can attend. It requires a political atmosphere that does not make a global celebration feel like a border checkpoint. Without that trust, the World Cup becomes something else. Not a festival. A stress test. A test of whether FIFA can control a tournament when the host country's politics create fear outside the pitch. A test of whether sponsors will tolerate uncertainty when billions are at stake. A test of whether federations will protect sporting participation or use participation as leverage. A test of whether fans will travel when human rights groups warn them to be cautious. And the test of whether the old myth that football is above politics can survive contact with reality. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter entering the conversation made this even more uncomfortable for FIFA. Blatter no longer controls the organization. But he knows how it works. He knows where pressure hurts. So when he supports warnings that fans should avoid traveling to the United States, it adds weight to a narrative FIFA once buried. It tells the football world that concerns about the 2026 tournament are not confined to activists or politicians. They are being repeated by people who once sat at the center of football power. That is why FIFA's position is so delicate. It cannot openly confront the United States too aggressively because the US is central to the tournament. It cannot ignore human rights concerns because FIFA's own rules and public commitments talk about inclusion, safety, and respect. It cannot force federations to stop asking questions. It cannot force fans to feel safe. It cannot force sponsors to ignore risk. And it cannot fully control American immigration policy. That leaves FIFA in a position it rarely wants to occupy. Dependent. Dependent on Washington to behave predictably. Dependent on European federations to stay committed. Dependent on fans to trust the travel environment. Dependent on sponsors to stay calm. Dependent on public controversy not becoming organized withdrawal. That is not power. That is exposure. And Germany made that exposure visible. The DFB's official statement may have closed the boycott door for now, but it did not erase the deeper question Gottlieb placed on the table: when does participation become complicity? That is the question FIFA cannot answer with a fixture list. Because if a host nation's policies restrict fans from qualified countries, what does inclusion mean? If immigration enforcement creates fear around host cities, what does safety mean? If global football leaders reward political figures while claiming neutrality, what does independence mean? If federations criticize Qatar but silence themselves over the United States, what do values mean? That is why the German bombshell matters. Not because Germany is certain to boycott, but because Germany revealed that the moral language of football is now being tested against political reality. And reality is not cooperating. The World Cup may still go ahead. The stadiums may fill. The cameras may roll. The anthem may play. The trophy may be lifted. But something has already changed. The World Cup was supposed to be untouchable. Too big to question. Too profitable to disrupt. Too powerful to politicize. But Germany has now reminded FIFA of something the governing body hoped the world had forgotten. Participation is not automatic. It is a choice. And once powerful nations begin to treat participation as a choice, FIFA's authority changes. Sponsors begin to calculate risk differently. Broadcasters begin to question value differently. Fans begin to think about safety differently. Governments begin to understand football not only as sport, but as leverage. That is why this moment matters. Germany did not cancel the 2026 World Cup. Germany did not destroy FIFA's master plan. Germany did something more subtle. It revealed that the plan was fragile all along. Because a tournament built on global unity cannot survive easily when the host environment creates fear, uncertainty, and political tension. A World Cup that depends on millions crossing borders cannot pretend immigration policy is irrelevant. A football spectacle sold as inclusion cannot ignore the possibility that some fans may be filtered, delayed, denied, or treated as risks before they ever reach the stadium. And that is the contradiction now sitting at the center of 2026. The United States wants the prestige of hosting the world. FIFA wants the revenue of the biggest tournament in history. Sponsors want predictable audiences. Broadcasters want guaranteed giants. But the world is asking a different question now. Who feels safe enough to come? Who feels respected enough to participate? And who has enough power to say no? That is the real bombshell. Not that Germany has walked away, but that Germany has made walking away part of the conversation. And once that happens, FIFA is no longer just organizing a tournament. It is managing a legitimacy crisis. So now the question is no longer only who will win the 2026 World Cup. The question is whether the World Cup can still claim to unite the world when the politics around it are dividing the world before the first whistle even blows. And if one football giant can make FIFA nervous simply by raising the possibility of absence, what happens if others begin to follow? What happens if sponsors begin to ask for guarantees? What happens if fans decide television is safer than travel? What happens if Canada and Mexico start looking like the stable hosts inside a tournament increasingly overshadowed by American political risk? And what happens if the biggest sporting event on earth becomes a warning to every future host nation that money, stadiums, and power are no longer enough? That is the story we are watching, which is far from over. If this breakdown gave you a deeper view of what is really happening behind the 2026 World Cup, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and watch the next Liberation Lens analysis on your screen. It is only becoming harder for FIFA to control. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should Germany follow through if the political climate gets worse? Should Europe use the World Cup as leverage? Or should football stay on the pitch no matter what happens outside the stadium? This is Liberation Lens, where perspective matters, and where we do not just watch the game, we follow the power behind it.